afternoon. Some of you may have noticed that I've got new hair. Have you noticed this? I'm going to be 40 in a few weeks' time, so I had a big choice. Am I going to get a fringe or get a tattoo? I'm saving the tattoo for 50. Now, as was said, I'm chief curator at Historic Royal Palaces, the independent charity that opens up the unoccupied royal palaces of London to visitors. And I have to tell you that we get no money from the government or the Crown, and we deserve your financial support. That's the official line on what I do. And the unofficial line on what I do is that I enjoy, in fact, I love talking about history, showing off, I admit that, and also dressing up in historical clothes and outfits. I do that at the office, and 4 years ago, I got the chance to do that on TV as well, when I became a part-time, on and off presenter for the BBC. I'm going to talk this afternoon about museums and television, as I sort of have an odd perspective with a foot in both camps, to see where they can benefit each other and also where the conflicts of interest can sometimes lie. This isn't always an easy relationship. I've got a few clips to show you on the big screen to give you an insight into how we make a program. And they are from a series called Harlots, Housewives and Heroines. Harlots, Housewives and Heroines, or Triple H as we called it, which is about women in the 17th century. The series was made last year to tie in with an exhibition that we held at Hampton Court Palace. And I chose to use this particular series because it's starting a repeat run tomorrow night, Wednesday night, at 10 p.m. on BBC4. So if you want to watch the whole thing, then you have that opportunity from tomorrow night and for the next 3 weeks. This is actually the 4th time they've repeated it, so it's really nice that the exhibition is still alive in this digital medium. I've made now 20 hours of television programs as a presenter, and someone pointed out the other day that when I finished the series that I'm working on now, somebody could set up a new channel that showed all of my shows back to back, day and night, continuously. This person also said that this would be a living hell. I work mainly for BBC4, the brainy channel, but sometimes for BBC Two. And in the last 12 months, I've worked on a BBC Two series that was called Fit to Rule, How Royal Illness Changed History. And that was based on various intimate royal art and items and artifacts from our collection at Historic Royal Palaces. I worked on a one-off program for BBC4 called Tales from the Royal Bedchamber, and that linked into this summer's exhibition at Hampton Court. And going back into my past, I also made a one-off for BBC4 about an English heritage property, an architectural history of Bolsover Castle in Derbyshire, where I started off my career, really. At the moment, I'm working on a series called The First Georgians, which is attached to the 300th anniversary of George I's accession next year, and the beginning of the Georgian age and all the exhibitions that are going to come along with that. Of course, as you know, the best-known anniversary of 2012 is going to be World War I, but we predict that the history-loving public will start to experience a condition next year known as metal fatigue. And metal fatigue is a surfeit of exhibitions, programs, and exhibitions connected to World War I. So we are hoping that the Georgians are going to provide a sort of frivolous, frothy contrast to that. So how did this come about? At one level, I think it's just an extension of the work that I do, that we all do anyway. The very first time I was filmed was when I was working for English Heritage in Derbyshire, and the local news programme, Look North, wanted to report on a new heritage leaflet that we'd made. And many of you, I know, do this yourselves. And to me, it seems just like an extension of the continuum that goes from guided tour to adult education session. It's just part of my normal job. But people do often ask me how I got involved as a presenter as opposed to a contributor. And basically, this happened because somebody knew somebody. It was networking in my case. I had written a history book, and somebody who worked at the company who published that knew somebody who worked at a television company. And 5 years ago, they were really on the hunt for female historians. They didn't have any female historians, it seemed. They still don't have enough female historians, but there's a few of us now. So I made a taster tape, which is like a filmed audition. It just gave a sample of who I was and what I like to talk about. I talked about a Tudor piss pot from our collection, actually. And eventually somebody at the BBC said, yes, we'll take a punt on her. And it was a punt, because although the sort of programs I make are pretty cheap, they're low budget, they do cost between £110,000 and £150,000 an hour or an episode. So they were looking at an investment of getting on for £500,000 for my first series. I really enjoyed the process of making it, and that's because I assumed that nobody would ever watch it. I was absolutely convinced that nobody would ever see this apart from my mom. And then, to my complete amazement and slight horror, people did watch it, and it went down quite well, and it sort of grew from there, really. Now, you might be thinking, well, this is all very nice for her, but what's it got to do with historic royal palaces, and what has it got to do with us as museums people? Well, I've always taken a lot of care to be associated with historic royal palaces. That's always how I am captioned or billed, and it's an important part of my persona on screen in television language. It gives me authority to talk. And sometimes people today ask me if I've given up my day job because they keep seeing me on Wednesday nights on BBC 4 at 10 o'clock. And actually, far from it. I spend the majority of my time doing my day job. When I'm working on a program, Historic Royal Palaces hires me to the BBC for a bit of cash, actually. We make a profit out of doing this. And I stick very firmly to history topics, which means that, sadly, because I would really love to do it, sadly, this means that you will never see me on Strictly Come Dancing. As time went by, I began to get myself into a position with the BBC where they would sometimes listen to my ideas and to make the programs that I and the people with whom I work had suggested, like Harlots, Housewives and Heroines, which took as its starting point our exhibition. The exhibition at the Palace was about the concept of beauty in 17th century art. And many of the characters, the portraits, were characters from the court of Charles II, including the room that famously brought together all of Charles I's mistresses. And we took that painting, that group of paintings, as our starting point for an exploration of 17th century society and gender history and cultural history. And we went off to other sites and other relevant collections elsewhere. Now, I'm making all this sound very slick, like it was a complete success story, but I want to explore the dark side, if you like, now. I'm sure that all the institutions that you work for at one time or another will have been approached by these siren voices from the television company. They say, our program will be seen by millions of viewers. You must drop everything, do what we want, and we won't give you any money for it. Unfortunately, what they want is not the same necessarily as what you want. Firstly, these mythical millions of viewers. Let's drill down into that a little bit. As a television producer, you live or die by these figures, and people tend to inflate them and show off about them. How are they actually calculated? It's done by something called BARB, which stands for the Broadcasters Audience Research Board. And they have a sample of several thousand people spread across the country who have a black box attached to their television that records what they're watching. And then this figure of what they're watching is timed up to apply for the whole population. It's quite vague, as you can see. What it enables is comparison between different programs and different channels, it seems to me, rather than absolute viewing hours of television. They can't confirm that the person watched the whole program. They may have just, switched it on for a minute and then switched it off again. Now, these TV producers, what they want is viewing figures, and they don't care what kind of viewing figures they are. So if they're the wrong kind of person in search of the wrong kind of figures, they would like nothing better than to film an accident or a scandal or your museum going up in flames, that sort of thing. If, on the other hand, you get involved in a really serious program that supports the values of your museum, has lots of good information in it about your collection, stuff that you'd really like potential visitors to see, then it's really annoying to discover that a lot of its success in TV terms, in viewing figures, is going to be down to the scheduling. Now, the people who do the scheduling, as I see it, sometimes care more about beating their rival channels than they do about your program. So if they see that a rival channel has put out a history documentary, well, they might put up your history documentary against it to try to steal the viewers. And the result is that neither documentary gets as many viewers as it would have done if it was shown at the same time as a cooking program or a drama. The reason that my series that I made about the history of murder did very well, it broke records, and I reluctantly have to admit this, the reason it did well was because it was up against motorway cops. And on Channel 4, they had a very depressing program about life in a brothel. So you would watch a history of murder just to not watch either of those things. Now, having filled in that background, I'm going to go through the different building blocks of one of the sort of programs that I've worked on, which are the script, the locations, the expert contributors, and finally, I'm going to discuss tone, the tone of the whole project. Now, the backbone of a presenter-led program like I've done is a series of pieces to camera, and that's when I'm just talking directly at the camera, directly at you, the viewer, setting out the argument or turning corners in the story, linking topics together. And they're time-consuming to do. They've got to be perfect. And people often ask me, how much control do I have over what I say? Well, the answer is probably both more than you think and less than you think. Firstly, pieces to camera are not scripted. We make them up on the spot. And that's in order to make them try more spontaneous. So they are my words, always. That's why, if you have a very diligent press officer, they will insist on being present during the filming. Because even if they've asked to see the script in advance, they will know that it doesn't necessarily reflect the finished product. It's very iterative. On the other hand, I do have to stick to an overall arc that's been agreed with our commissioners, with our partners, often, it seems, with the whole world and his dog. And I don't have editorial control, which is which bits get in and which bits get chucked out again. Often, when we're filming in a museum environment, it seems to me that the museum people don't necessarily appreciate the time pressure that the television crew is under. We get 7 days to film an hour's program, sometimes 8 if we're lucky. 9 is luxurious. And we always work a 12-hour day. And we usually work from 7 till 7, so that we get into sites or galleries at 7 o'clock, so we can film until 10 when the visitors come in. And if we waste any of that time, it really matters. It shows in the quality of the final program. I had no idea until I saw it for myself how much of a compromise television is between time and money. Of course, it is in all areas of life, but it seems really sharp in television. I sometimes have the perception that time moves differently according to which role I'm inhabiting. Museum time goes like this, and television time goes like this. And that's why often a TV crew looks disorganized, last-minute-y. I see this from both sides, but I know that the TV crew is often late, because literally things have changed from hour to hour. One little change to the 12-hour schedule throws everything else out. Now I'm going to show you 2 sample pieces to camera, both of which were done under quite difficult circumstances. And weirdly, that's often when I do my best work. The first one takes place on horseback. And I'm talking about the 17th century traveller Celia Fiennes. And let me tell you, until this day, I had not been on a horse since I tried it once when I was 15. you'll see me on the back of a specially trained film horse, a very safe horse called Geoffrey. Geoffrey, the very safe horse, was great because I could make him go forwards by going, giddy up, and then I could make him stop by going, whoa. But he was so well trained that if I went, whoa, too hard, he went into reverse and he started walking backwards. Although he was a very safe horse, you will notice that I'm riding side saddle and that I'm not wearing a helmet. And when a helicopter went over, this is the worst moment, Geoffrey's handler said, "There's nothing we can do if he bolts." The second piece, which follows straight on, was filmed in the maze at Hampton Court Palace at about 4:30 on a winter afternoon. And at 4:30 on a winter afternoon, you're just about to lose the light. That is, I can't tell you how stressful that is. And this second piece to camera that you'll see was done in those final seconds before it became too dark to film. There was no chance for it to go wrong or to do it again. And I think that you can sense the tension of that. But weirdly, it actually helps the storytelling. It adds a bit of pace and energy to it all. So let's see the first clip, please. Celia's always been a heroine of mine because of her independence. She stayed single, really unusual for a Restoration woman, and this gave her control of her own fortune. She used it to go travelling. She travelled 3,000 miles over her lifetime. This was extraordinary, even for a contemporary man. Catherine of Braganza discovered that the king had a mistress. This was Barbara. And Catherine was furious. She said, "Never am I going to meet that terrible woman." But Barbara wasn't going to give up and disappear. She nagged the king to make her one of Catherine's ladies of the bedchamber, some of the queen's most intimate servants. But Catherine realised what was going on. She got the list of new ladies, she saw Barbara's name, and she crossed her out. But Barbara still didn't give up. She came to Hampton Court and she had herself introduced to the Queen. The Queen didn't catch the name and hadn't realised what had happened. When she discovered, she was furious. She burst into tears and she had a nosebleed. She complained to the King, but the King took Barbara's side. Take that. Let's talk about access to locations. People often ask me why I'm filmed randomly walking about. Well, it's often just to show off a wonderful, beautiful, amazing, special place and to prove that I was there and also to carry the commentary or the voice over. And this question of access to locations, I perceive a whole range of reactions. The places that have the highest demand charge the highest fees, obviously, which means, unfortunately, on a BBC4 budget, we just can't afford to film that. On the other hand, other places, other museums could not be more helpful, and they are often offered a choice between a credit at the end of the programme or a location fee. And many of them, because of those siren voices from the TV companies, they say, "We'll take the credit, it's great, we're going to be on the telly." But I would say, if your museum or site is not going to be featured as itself, it's better to take the money. Because often a location is being used as a backdrop or it's standing in for somewhere else that it wasn't possible to get access to. Often it's standing in for the expensive place. So I make your decision carefully there. Another time that comes up time and time again is access to objects. Now, you might think, my object is on a case. What's the problem? You can see it perfectly well through the glass. Well, unfortunately, the camera is going to see that glass. The thing is not going to look as good in a case. And then there's our question of attitudes towards objects. Personally, I believe that if it's at all possible for conservation reasons, they should be handled with care, but with confidence, so that the viewer can see them from all sides, and to show them being cherished, if you like, to show them being real. If the thing is not going to move on screen, you may as well show a JPEG or have a PowerPoint presentation. But opening a case, as you know, is a good deal of bother, and it can't always be done. And don't tell me that you have hard and fast rules about this at your museum, because I know that you don't. I'm often amused to be told, "Oh no, you can't handle that object, we can't get the conservators here, the lender won't allow it, etc." And then I hear that David Dimbleby got to touch it the week before. It's really annoying. Let's have a look at a clip showing the use of a location. This is Broughton Castle, home of Celia Fiennes. And it appeared in this programme very much as Broughton Castle, and it just looked stunningly beautiful. I'm pretty sure that its appearance in this programme motivated a few visits. This clip is only 22 seconds long, just to give you a little taste. Clip 2, please.
Celia toured the country well before travel had become a fashionable pastime. In fact, she's the first woman recorded to have visited every different county in the kingdom. She travelled on roads largely unaltered since Roman times, but the country she surveyed was changing fast, and Celia was fascinated by every last detail of its transformation.
Then there's the question of access to knowledge and expertise. Some people are natural communicators, other people just aren't. And I would say if they don't want to be on camera, don't make them. Some people just find it painful. Or, and this is a very common fear that subject specialists have, they think that they're somehow going to be stabbed in the back. The other day I arrived at a nameless National Trust property, I'm not going to tell you which one, to interview a curator there. And I asked him a question. I said, oh, it's great that you've got here. I've heard you know everything. Tell us what you know. And he said, oh, you want to rape my mind. Well, on one level, I did, actually. I wanted him to convey the essence of 25 years' research succinctly and amusingly for our programme. But I also wanted him to share the benefit of the 25 years he'd spent researching this topic at his employer's expense, not for his own good, but for the public good too. Brevity is also a real problem with expert contributors. When I was a complete beginner at this, I remember being interviewed for The One Show by Giles Brandreth. You know, him with the wears jumpers and collects teddy bears. And we were at Hampton Court, and we were in Henry VIII's council chamber, and I told him how Henry VIII, in this very room, had decided to write a letter to the Pope, saying that he was concerned that maybe he shouldn't have got married to Catherine of Aragon because possibly this was unlawful, and that if the Pope wouldn't give him a divorce, he was going to think about founding the Church of England instead of the Church of Rome and getting his divorce and marrying Anne Boleyn instead. And Giles Brandreth said, so Henry VIII founded the Church of England in order to marry Anne Boleyn. And I went, whoop, what happened there? And of course, that was the bit that they used in the finished report. And he didn't, I know now that he did not mean to upstage me or steal my line or trivialize what I was saying. He was just trying to do his job, which was to tell the whole story of the Reformation in 3.5 minutes. Now, one answer to this is to go on media training, but oddly, this can backfire. It can leave people feeling so afraid of looking foolish that they're afraid to say anything at all. And in the best interviews, I don't know what's going to happen. And sometimes there are all sorts of serendipitous and lucky accidents. In the clip that's coming up, I interview Dr. Richard Luckett of the Pepys Library in Cambridge about Samuel Pepys and an encounter he had with one of the royal mistresses. And I think you can tell that I had absolutely no idea that he was going to say what he said. Next, please.
These women, particularly Barbara, had quite an effect on him, didn't they?
Oh, tremendous effect. Yes, there is the occasion when Pepys goes to the Chapel Royal and he's registering that there's both the Queen and Lady Castlemaine, amazingly, in her nightclothes.
Mm-hmm. What happens?
Well, I did make myself to do the thing.
He did the thing. He did the thing with Lady Castlemaine and the Queen and all those people present.
By mere imagination, he experienced an emission.
He's in the room with the Queen and Barbara Castlemaine, and
Yes.
he's got so excited that...
And to his own embarrassment.
To my embarrassment, too. And you are blushing. Oh, dearie me. Samuel Pepys.
In this next clip, the interview goes right off the rails altogether. But we actually kept it and we used it. What you get to see was actually used in the programme just because it was quite funny. I'm doing an interview with Dr. Sarah Toulahan from Exeter University about a 17th century health manual, because we were exploring contemporary understandings of reproduction. Sarah Toulahan is great. I've interviewed her several times now because she's so enthusiastic. And another points to watch for here is look at how good her shirt looks on camera. The next clip, please.
This masterpiece was the ultimate restoration sex guide, a 17th century joy of sex. And no, it wasn't written by the Aristotle. It's actually anonymous, but some cunning publisher stole the Greek's name to boost sales and give it an air of respectability.
It's very technical. We've got here a description of the clitoris, which both in form and colour resembles the comb of a cock. It looks fresh and red. And sorry, your face. Well, it's very, very...
It's explicit.
Her shirt looked great, didn't it? Now, you lot all have a really big area of common ground with television directors that our colleagues in academia really don't necessarily share at all. You understand that audiences are not one great amorphous lump. Often, when I'm interviewing an academic, they can only imagine their colleagues and their peers watching the programme, and this inhibits them. I believe that you all have the ability to watch a programme, think, that was completely terrible, I hated that, and yet to appreciate that it just wasn't aimed at you. It may have been successful in its own terms. And that's because we can appreciate that an exhibition aimed at goths is not going to appeal to a group of little old ladies and vice versa. So that brings us on to the question of tone. Now, I'm very happy, as you can see, to clown about, wear silly clothes, etc., because I'm an entry-level historian. It's my job to cast the hook, to pull people in, to encourage them then to read a book, do an evening class, sign up for an Open University degree. And this has actually happened. People have written to me to tell me this, which is just brilliant. The next clip shows Professor Aileen Ribeiro at the Courtauld Institute of Art. She's one of the country's leading experts on 17th century art. And to her credit, she joined us on a much more playful sequence on makeup, which ended up being one of the more popular parts of the programme.
During the Commonwealth, Puritan leaders tried to pass a law against the wearing of makeup.
A more adventurous woman would certainly paint the nipples with cochineal.
I don't fancy it. You've porridged me. But now mistresses became masters of this new and supposedly sexy art.
This is not lead, but it's the equivalent of lead. Now, women didn't know that lead was poisonous, but there was nothing as effective as of covering the face.
You've turned me into a ghost.
Perhaps when we put the cochineal on, you might be a bit more convinced.
Which is?
Beetle wings, first discovered by the conquistadores in Mexico in the early 16th century.
To me, it just looks like a horrific bruise.
Well, it may look like you, but it may have sort of given a subliminal sexual message.
Now, Aileen is a good sport. She's a real expert in her subject, and she's a born communicator, but she's a terrible makeup artist. So, in conclusion, is the television your friend or not? At one level, it is not. The role of the film crew is basically to get you to give more access, more information, more time, more objects, more energy than you want to, for less money than you want to. They will divert you from other work. They will possibly trivialize or sensationalize what you do. They can possibly damage the standing and the integrity of your institution. But I do think, I would say this, wouldn't I? I do think there are some pockets of the television industry, if you choose them carefully, who can be your friends. Because if they are interested in arts and history and culture and science, and if they want to reach as many people as possible with their programs, then they do have some overlap in aim with you. And I want to end with a secret admission. For me, the most important thing about this series I've been talking about today is that it isn't really a history series at all. It's my stealth vehicle for trying to change people's attitudes, to change the world, if you like. This is the best shot that I think I'm going to get to make society more the way that I want it to be. The final clip is the opening of the series, which hints pretty strongly, I think, that this isn't necessarily just a history series. It's also 3 hours of film that promotes something very dear to me, which is the cause of feminism. This clip will mark the end of my talk, so thank you for listening. And after it's over, feel free to clap if you want.
On the 29th of May, 1660, King Charles II returned from exile to reclaim his throne. Everyone believed the Stuart dynasty had lost power forever. His father, Charles I, had been publicly executed only 10 years previously, and England had been firmly in the grip of Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth. But now, the monarchy was back in business.
The Restoration was a turning point in British history. It marked the end of the medieval and the beginning of the modern age. It affected the life of every single person in the country. In this series, I'm looking at the lives of women in the late 17th century. This is a really exciting time to be a woman. For centuries, they've been looking about in the footnotes of history, but now they come to prominence. Some of them have such modern attitudes and ambitions, and we see them coming up against a world that was still pretty male and misogynistic.
Over 3 programmes, I'm exploring their lives at the lavish and liberated royal court.
The king, without a doubt, would have been completely delighted.
If all my clothes had suddenly fallen off.
Yes, I'm sure he would.
At home, behind closed doors. And in public, at work and play.
She dominated the theatre. She had more plays put on than anybody. Not any woman, any man.
You might have thought that Britain was swinging in the 1960s, but it was the 1660s that really shook things up.